There once was a man who was full of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. He started out with literally nothing. But with these qualities, and with some old-fashioned hard work, he began to make his fortune. The moment he started working, he proved to have a knack for success. He soon had people working for him, and he also proved to be a great leader. He led by example, but he also inspired others to find success of their own. He was so full of wisdom and understanding that he often wrote down his ideas just for the sake of his own expression, but others would read his thoughts on a particular topic, and they were so beneficial and helpful that they would circulate and would eventually become published works and bestsellers. He was an entrepreneur, a respected leader, a great thinker and poet, and a godly man full of the Holy Spirit. He became so successful that he had properties all over the world. And he was such a giver that he funded many charities, hospitals, orphanages, and ministries all over the world. Everything and everyone that he touched flourished. There was no secret that his success was due to the fact that he would not make a single decision without much prayer, faith, and obedience to God's leading. For this reason, he never boasted about his accomplishments, because he knew that he was blessed. He always gave glory and praise to God. Early one morning, he walked out onto his balcony outside of his bedroom. He was in one of his many mansions. This particular one was on a hill that sat on many acres of land, and his bedroom was on the third floor. He was talking to God and looking out over the large property. The sun was barely starting to come up, and as the light touched the horizon, he was in awe of all that God had blessed him with. Even though this was just one of his many properties, because of the fact that he knew that as far back as his eyes could see was his, it became symbolic of all that he owned. And as he pondered the greatness of God, he also thought of all that he had accomplished and all those that he had helped. He was overwhelmed with gratitude. But as he continued to pray and the full weight of the moment filled his heart, he became aware of one fact that he could not deny. He had no one to share it with. Now, he was not sad or lonely or depressed, nor did he feel like he was incomplete or lacking in any way, but he felt that all that he had and all that he had done would be validated by having someone to share it with. It was almost as if none of it really mattered without that special someone. He was so overwhelmed by the thought that he felt that his main calling in his life was to be a husband. From that moment on, he could not shake the need that he felt to be a protector and provider. He felt that God had filled him with so much love that there was no way it could be for him to keep to himself. He wanted a wife to love. In a strange way, even though he didn't know her yet, he was already in love with his wife. He could see her in his mind and heart and in his dreams. Maybe not her face, but he could see who she was. Soon word got around that he was looking for someone to share his life with. And as anyone would have guessed, there was no shortage of willing candidates. In the following days, many people came to him. There were women expressing their worthiness, fathers and mothers offering their daughters, and friends wanting to fix him up. He met more women in the next few months than he had met his entire life. But it seemed to always end the same way. He was always excited and eager to get to know the young lady. They would meet, start talking, get to know each other, but at some point in the conversation, it was as if everything that was being said seemed to fade into the background, and he would look in their eyes. Not at their eyes to see what color or shade they were, but it seemed that God gave him the ability to look through their eyes and into their soul, and he would know, this is not her. Sometimes it was after an hour of conversation, sometimes it was within the first 5 seconds. But as soon as it happened, he would not pursue it any further. He wasn't rude or disrespectful, but he would politely finish the meeting and in his mind cross the name off of his list. Because in his heart, he loved her. He knew that he would recognize her. though he had never met her. One evening, he attended a gathering in his honor, where he met many interesting people. There were many successful men and women there, and many believers. It was a singles gathering that his friends had put together with the purpose of finding someone for him. Many women spoke to him, and some were very bold and straight out told him why they thought they would be a perfect match for him. I can cook, I can do this and that, I've accomplished so-and-so. He listened to all of them, but in the end, by the end of the night, he knew that none of them were the ones. So he left the gathering disappointed and a little frustrated. He asked his driver to go on home without him, and he decided to walk home even though it was several miles. He walked and he cried out to God, God, I love you and I trust you. I surrender my every expectation to you. I ask for patience, Lord. I don't want to just find anyone. I want to find that someone that I can love you through her. As he continued to pray, he felt God lead him through a detour, and he soon found himself walking down a strange, dark street. He became very aware that he was in a bad part of town. He normally would have turned around and gotten back onto a familiar road, but he could tell that God was leading him. He heard what sounded like a fight or struggle of some sort. In obedience to the prompting in his heart, he tried to find out where the noise was coming from. He went down an alley and discovered a man assaulting a woman. Without a second thought, he charged at the man and wrestled him to the ground. They struggled for a moment, then the man pulled out a knife, stabbed him, and he ran off, yelling obscenities. The man wasn't fatally stabbed, so he stood up and he picked up the bride. He picked up the woman, and he carried her to his house. He had his own personal doctor come in and examine her and examine him. And his wound wasn't fatal, so he was fine. But the woman was unconscious, and she was like in a coma. And so he started to take care of her and nurture her back to health. And then as he was nurturing her, he started to inquire about her, started to find out who she was. He found out that the man who was assaulting her was her husband. And so he went over, as she was still recovering, he went over to talk to the husband. And he found out that the man, or the husband, had found her when she was a runaway. She had been a teenager who had a rough life growing up, right? And she had run away from home. And this man, he took her in, and he hadn't legally married her, but he convinced her that he was her protector, that he would provide for her. And so to her, that was her husband. And so when the wealthy man went and he told him about the wife, he seemed like he didn't even care about her. And so the wealthy man wanted her to be free from him, right? Because they weren't even legally married. And so he started looking into it, found out that man was a powerful man. He had a lot of connections, and that when he had taken this woman, he had kind of made her a slave to him. And so he said, what is it going to take for you to free her? What is it going to take for you to set her free? And so the evil man, the husband, he drew up some papers and he said, if you sign over all that you have, I will set her free. And so the guy, he was thinking about that, right? He went back home and he was nurturing her and he was taking care of her. And then as he was taking care of her, she woke up. She woke up, and when she woke up, he looked into her eyes. And when he looked into her eyes, he saw that this was her. And he knew without question, this was that woman that he had dreamed about. He knew that this was that picture that he had in his mind that he knew God had put there. It wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't just some imagination, but it was something that God had put. It was this thing of faith, and he knew that this was her. And so he knew that everything that he had wasn't worth anything without her. So he was willing to give it all up in order to have her. And so he went back to the husband and he signed everything over to the husband. But that husband, he was an evil man. And he had all these connections to legal things. And so he not only signed, accepted all of this stuff. But he said, you know what, she's done a lot of things in her life. She's committed a lot of crimes. You know, under me, she's stolen, she's been, you know, a harlot, she's done all these things. And the guy said, well, what do I need to do to free her from it? And he said, and so because he had connection with politicians and all that, they wrote up documents where all the charges, all the things that she had done were put on the wealthy man's, under his name. And so he had to be imprisoned because of all of her crimes. But he said that he would willingly do it because he loved her, because he knew that this was the woman for him. And so he was incarcerated, and even though he was a respected man, and he was a man who was loved by many, well, because, you know, when there's a lot of respect, there's also a lot of haters. And so in prison, you know, there was people that were against him. And so he got beaten, and he got mistreated every day that he was in prison. And then he finally came up to the point where he was going to go to trial. During the time that he was in prison, the woman had been set free. And she was no longer bound to the husband. She was now a single free woman because the marriage was never legal. And so when he was in court, he inquired to find out where she was. And she was doing exactly the same things that she was doing before when she was with her husband. Because that's the only life that she knew. Like, she went back to what she knew. She didn't go back to the husband, but she went back to that life. So people started to investigate into the case, you know, because the guy was now up for trial. He was going before the judge. He had surrendered all of his property, but there was like investigators looking into his possessions, and they came across a book where he wrote down, you know, his like a journal where he wrote down what he would do every day. And in that journal, they found the details of everything that had happened. Even from when he had first started looking for a wife, and how he looked for a wife, and how he found this woman being assaulted, and all the deals that had gone through. They found all of that on this book, right? And so they were like trying to figure out, is this true, right? The lawyers and the police and all that. Right? Did this really happen? And the only one who could validate that, whether this happened or not, was the woman. So they sought out and they found her. And they found this woman and they brought her into court. Right? And so she read everything that had happened. And she started to see everything that the wealthy man had gone through for her. And for the first time in her life, she understood the love that this man had for her. She had never seen that. That's why she couldn't get past the life that she had. When she realized that, then she went to court and she said, yes, this is all true. And so when that happened, well, they set the wealthy man free. And they incarcerated the old evil man because of all that he had done. And so then the wealthy man got back all that he had. And then the woman, understanding the love that this man had for her, started, like all the things that had been told to her, all the things that she had been through in her life, started to go away, and all the thoughts of love and all the pictures that this wealthy man had of her started to take over her own thoughts of herself. And so she became the woman that the wealthy man had always known her to be, even though he never knew her. And so they were joined and they became married. And they lived happily ever after. Now that story, if you haven't figured it out, is the story of Christ and the church.